So any questions about where we stand at the moment, what we're doing, how things are going, where you should be? We're just taking our time. There's no rush. You read through Eusebius at your own rate. How many pages, depending on what volume you're using. Penguin is a little different than the one I'm using, but they're all the same. I'm going to go up approximately to maybe page, thanks a lot, Noah. Maybe page 160 in this book, mine, which is chapter 22. Chapter 22 of, what book is it anyway? Can't even tell. Chapter 22 of book 4. So basically, it's the first and second books that we'll focus on, but I'm going to go up to chapter 22 of book 4. Now, the rest of this, it goes on and on. I don't even think I've read the rest of this. I suppose I should. It's so awful that it's hard for me to read it, but not anything in the rest of it that I felt was relevant. So I never got beyond the period of the Bar Kokhba Revolution. I mean by the Bar Kokhba Revolution, the second Jewish revolt, which, as you know, is around 132 to 136. If you didn't know it, now you know it. I'll write it on the board for you. If I can find here's a pen. Let's see if it's working or if it's one of these that are out. Pretty weak, but he talks about Bar Kokhba in Eusebius, and it was the second Jewish revolt against Rome in the time of Hadrian. I have a pen. I can dig it up here. I will use more effectively than that. Okay. So that's second Jewish revolt against Rome. There were two. We don't know much about the second Jewish revolt. Why? Because we don't have a Josephus who lived at that time to fill us in on this massive, almost encyclopedic presentation of detail that he gives us about the first. And frankly, I think the writers of the Gospels and the book of Acts benefited tremendously from Josephus. People don't like to think that. There's sources that went into things because everyone likes to think these are divine revelations. Maybe they are, but it's, I think, pretty clear in some cases there are sources. Divine is a matter of definition. You can speak of something as divine if you are admiring of it. If you're not admiring of it, it may not be so divine for you. The Quran, for instance, is supposed to be a divine revelation by something, some angel or something. You know, if I'm a Muslim, obviously I'm going to be expressing myself in those terms, showing I have some law, and I'm impressed by this exercise in expression. If I'm not a Muslim, I probably wouldn't call it a divine revelation. And not being a Muslim, I don't call it a divine revelation because I see where he's, I don't want to use that word, cheating? No, I don't want to use that word. Where he's borrowing things from other literature. And I don't think God has to borrow anything. Angels don't need to borrow things. So the human aspects of some of these documents are written all over them. But to the religionist, the believer, the follower, the adept, they're expressing their awe for these documents. So there was no Josephus in the Bar Kokhba period, so we know so little about it. There was a Josephus for the first revolt. So when was the first revolt? 66 to 73 AD, or CE, however you express it. Actually 70, because 70 is the crucial moment. Broke out in 66, it ended in 70. What happened in 70?
The temple.
The fall of the temple, the burning of the temple, burning of parts of Jerusalem. But we say it actually limped on to 73 because Josephus actually takes his narrative up till 73. And he's a interrogator by that time. He describes his betrayal of his people who going over to the Roman side, how he affected that by applying the Jewish messianic prophecy to Vespasian, as we said last time. The messianic prophecy from Numbers, I think 24:17. Let's see, how does that go? A star will rise from Jacob, a scepter to rule the world, therefore known as the star prophecy. He applies that to the Roman conqueror of Palestine, saying that he was going to rise out of Palestine to rule the world, meaning the Roman world, and take over the emperorship of the assassinated Nero. So, you know, con men, imposters, and by the way, Josephus hates con men and imposters, though he's one himself. You know, I mean, a rose by any other name is still a rose. You can call and accuse others of being this, and you may end up being that yourself. Maybe I am too. In any case, con men and imposters, people, posers really, posturers, can do a lot with ancient prophecy and can impress masses of people who are very credulous, you know, were easy to believe. And that was the problem in the Roman period. People were really credulous. They believed in things like exorcisms. They believed in things like, you know, miracles that magicians could wreak, like turning water into wine or something, or multiplying loaves. These are all kind of magical so-called signs or tricks or whatever. Now, of course, they're presented in the Gospels as religious signs that this person is of extraordinary power. But that's what the ancient world wanted to show, that these people, like Josephus, not Jesus, forget him, had extraordinary power, and they could play on the superstition of the groups that they were dealing with. And of course, what the groups that they were dealing with often were afraid of was the future and death. Even political figures were frightened of making the wrong decision. They wanted to know that the gods were lined up, that the fates were auspicious, that the auguries were good. The worst thing in the world is to act. It's much easier to defer action. We have a word stall or something like that, prevaricate. Much easier to do that than actually take action. How does Hamlet express it in Shakespeare? He's the perfect prevaricator. Whether I to be or not to be, whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the stings of outrageous fortune, or to, you know, take arms against a sea of troubles and thereby end them. Very elegantly put, but it's the dilemma of the prevaricator. And in order to act, most people need firm basis. So Ronald Reagan's wife used to watch the astrology charts, and she wouldn't do anything that wasn't in the right alignment of the stars for her husband, and he was just like a sap. He would like, oh, okay, dear, and she would like wind him up and send him out there. I mean, he's actually a bigger sap than poor George. And George's wife is actually smarter than Reagan's wife. So George's in good shape because he's got a very intelligent wife, and she knows more than he knows about everything, and he knows that, and I give him credit for that. I give him credit for that. He defers to her, and he knows that she's far more talented and effective than him. So that's already a virtue that someone knows when they're limited, and knows they've got someone with them who's far more effective and far-seeing. Reagan was the same, but his wife wasn't as intelligent as Bush's wife. And Bush's parents should actually get down on their hands and knees and thank God that he met this young lady from Midland, Texas. Otherwise, he'd still be probably in the Alcoholics Anonymous Association. And he would never even be approached. Nothing they did helped him get to be president except pull strings. What made him president is his wife. And they should kiss her feet for all the good that she did the Bush family and legacy. They were so lucky. And so that's off the subject, but just on the Mrs. Reagan used to look for a something to make action a certainty. So people like Josephus took advantage of this by posing. So that he would say, you've been prophesied. Don't worry, Vespasian. It's in our ancient writings that you are going to be called from Palestine to rule the world. You can act, you can move. And that's what ancients look for, a certainty for action. And that's what all these signs are supposed to show in the ancient manuscripts. And then you say, well, are any of them real? You ask me? No, I don't think a single one of them is real. But that's just me. I'm a modern skeptic. Don't listen to me. You have to make your own decision on these. They attract us. They're the things that we remember most. They're the things that are in the literature, in the tradition, that make the biggest impression on us because they're so awe-inspiring. It was just some fellow getting down, sitting with prostitutes and sinners around the table and saying a few clever things. That wouldn't impress us at all. But the fact that all these other things occurred, that blows our mind. And that's what it's meant to do. It's meant to blow your mind. The problem is that we're very trusting. We're believers. We don't think anyone is trying to take advantage of our credulity. We assume we give the people who are writing a certain document the best motives. We don't think that maybe actually they're trying to exploit something in us and get control of us. I was watching the Thomas Jefferson piece the other night on PBS, and it was really, I don't know what he said, but it was something really clever. I can't put it into words. I know what he said. But he said, whenever I see a priest, he meant a religious figure of some kind, he knows that we're about to be involved in control of some kind. That these people are not people looking for real truth. They're looking to control people, control masses, control minds. They're authority beings. And I didn't say it, he said it, but he put it in such a way, I wish I could remember the quote. How many saw that Thomas Jefferson piece? It's a new series done by that guy who does the Civil War, baseball, all those things. That guy does documentaries. Anyway, he had that quote from Thomas Jefferson that was so amazing, and we're so lucky to have had people like that involved in the founding of our country, because there's nobody even around today who's on that level. These are people 200 or 300 years ago. They're on such a high intellectual level. He, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton. I mean, these guys were actually almost literally geniuses. James Madison, these guys, small country, maybe out of a catchment area of a couple of 100,000 people. You've got a collection of basically quasi-geniuses. We got a catchment area of like a couple of 100 million people, and we can't even come near the level of some of those people then. And they put down the first constitutional government because they were so intelligent. And we wouldn't be able to do the same today. There wouldn't be people on that level who could do it. And you know, Europe, look at Europe. Europe's trying to get together with the federal government. They still can't do it. It's 200 years later. And they're still wrestling with the federal system. How are we going to work out the relationship of different states to the, to the body politic as a whole? They're grappling with this 200 years later. The problems these guys basically more or less solved in an effective way, not the only way, 200 years ago. This country is so far advanced politically over other countries that other countries are not aware of it, and America isn't aware of it. So, people don't understand that this is the oldest government in the world. That we are the oldest modern government. We think we're the youngest country. No, we're not. We're the oldest. Because there were no constituted governments before the American one. And other countries are just trying to get constituted. Middle East countries are hardly coming out of the Middle Ages politically. And other countries are having, a tough time trying to move forward politically. Japan, with little American help, got there after the Second World War and is basically bumbling through. Germany as well, to some extent, with some help from us. But other countries, England doesn't have a constitution. They have no idea half the time what they're doing. You know, they're bumbling along, and Europe is in total chaos intellectually as far as how to work it out. And so, you know, these guys were really intelligent. I just say that the awe that one has, even a statement like Thomas Jefferson, in terms of what do religious people represent. We think they may represent teaching, insight, inspiration, possibly, but all he saw was mind control and power. And I don't think he's far wrong, frankly, I hate to say it. They don't maybe know it, but they have to protect their jobs, their role. Priest classes have always been in the business of control. It goes back to the Persian periods and the Roman periods and the Jewish period. Priest classes control in other words, to continue in their favored status position. And part of the control is mind control. And what we are dealing with in this subject in the modern world is an inability to realize that the people disseminating these information documents on which their control was based may not always have been straightforward with us, but may have been trying to attract us by presenting things that are historically unrealistic and possibly even inaccurate. And so that's what our job is here. Now going back to where I was, we were talking about the Maccabean uprising, as I recall. How far along did we get in that last time? I thought we came down to the history of the return from captivity, the building of the second temple. We didn't do all of that? I think we did. Where did we leave off? Who's got the last, what's your note say? Give me your last sentence of your note.
Titus?
Titus. So we did get down there. In any case, just to review it with you, you know, after the return from captivity in the 500s, get that in the prophets. Some of that is in the Isaiah book. When, if you look at second Isaiah, as we call it, Isaiah is considered by scholars to be a compendium of several documents, not just one document. The second part of it is in the Persian period. The first part is in the Assyrian Babylonian period. That's a spread of 200 years there. So it isn't that Isaiah lives for 200 years, it's just that a second writer has been tacked on to the first writer. It took mankind about 2,500 years to discover that. That's where control is affected, because where religious documents go, man and womankind are not often allowed to use their minds, because the priest classes and others that control the religious documents become threatened if you question some of their assumptions on certain issues, and therefore become very aggressive, like inquisitions, burnings. Burning at the stake is a powerful dissuading from doing too much questioning, as Galileo discovered, much to his dismay. He was offered burning or silence, and what did he choose? Silence. Smart man, maybe. Not very courageous, but certainly very smart. At least he was able to live, well, he was under house arrest for the last 10 or 15 years of his life, but at least he was able to carry on and not be, I wouldn't want to be on a stake burning, would you? I mean, you couldn't get much worse than that, and that's done in the name of religion until fairly recently, 1600s. In some places, even more recently. So we've only been free to talk about these things for a while. So Isaiah is clearly composite. You talk to a believer, they're not even aware of it. And in fact, they get aggressive if you say it to them, because they don't like to hear such things. And it's sad, because first what comes in is atavism, a native knee-jerk reaction to protecting your heritage, which is normal. Everyone does that. You know, it's a kind of tribalism. That's what I was given. That's what my people believe. That's what my ancestors believe. That's what my church believes. That's what my synagogue believes. That's what my mosque tells me. And then, you know, my high school team against your high school team is what it comes down to. But that's not an intellectual activity. That's just knee-jerk, protective of your communal solidarity, which is normal, but in the university you have to let that go. Although, if you're not willing to let that go, you just shouldn't take controversial courses at the university. So, it wasn't until, 18th century that people could, 19th century, when they could be protected against burning. That's really what it comes down to. I'm on some asides because I want to get this out of the way. You know why we're facing what we're facing now in the Muslim world? Because they're not yet protected from burning. They don't burn, they just chop people's heads off. But it's the same basic impetus. You say something different from what I like to hear, or what I've taught, or what someone said 1,400 years ago, I can kill you. And I can kill you with total freedom. And nobody is going to do anything to me. And that's the whole Muslim world now. And we don't know that. We thought the Muslim world was like sophisticated, civilized. Yes, it is. But only on the surface. There are people who are very sophisticated, very educated, very civilized, wonderful manners. But the Middle Ages was like that. People had wonderful manners, wonderful clothes, wonderful artworks, wonderful, ways of behavior. But when the chips were down on belief issues, if they crumbled to threats, then they're still in a medical society. So we were crumbling to threats in the West until we separated church and state. That's why the guys who wrote the Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, Constitution were so clever. They put in there freedom of religion, no coercion in matters of religion, and so on and so forth, which we're now backing off from. So they were way, way ahead of us. So the moment your rights were protected and you knew you could speak without being killed, then you started to speak. Then you start to look at it. And that's really what the whole thing is. And what's going on in Baghdad today? Nobody can speak unless they risk being killed. And they will be killed. Because there's always some fanatic, maniac, who feels that he's been entitled either by his revolutionary organization or God or another group to go and put a bomb under that person's car or cut that person's throat or kill his children or something. So if you're in a situation like that, if you're a good person, what are you going to do? Well, a few people will martyr themselves, but the most people will hide and shut up. That's the same thing in the Palestine area. It's the same thing in Chechnya. It's the same thing in all these countries. It's the same thing in Pakistan. It goes across all those. And we in the West are just beginning to learn it, and it's going to be very difficult in the nuclear age, because when nuclear weapons get in the hands of medieval-minded people, all horror is going to break out, and that's what's coming, and we don't realize it. They will feel no compunction, as I told you, to put nuclear weapons in Long Beach Harbor, in New York Harbor, if they can get them into a container ship or a transport ship or something, anything like that. And if they can set it off by remote control, one day you'll be walking to this campus and suddenly you'll see it won't be a rocket ship that came in that can be, anti-ballistic defender. It'll just be suddenly someone will send a signal and boom, you'll see a mushroom cloud go up in front of you. And it's terribly frightening. It's absolutely stupendously frightening, and it's the most dangerous time in the history of the world that you can possibly imagine. And it has to do with medieval religious mindset. And that's why, it's so important to get constitutions out there, to protect people's rights, and to allow people to argue and discuss, particularly matters of religion. Anyway, that's my sermon on that subject. Isaiah is clearly got three different sections. But the second section of Isaiah is written in the Persian period. And it actually gives, I can read it to you, I don't have it with me, it actually gives the words that the Persian king who conquered the Babylonians, I know I'm away from where you're at, but who conquered the Babylonians said to the Jewish community that had been carried away to Babylon, the words he used to order or entitle them or allow them to return. Now I've said a whole lot there. Can you fill in the piece there so we can move on down the chronological frame? What's the Jewish community doing in Babylon at that moment when the second part of Isaiah, not the first part of Isaiah, is actually written, and it's certainly written at that time? Well, how come they're there?
Exile.
What happened? How'd they get there?
After
Yeah, tell me. That's what we want to know. After what? See, that's why I did this, to try to get you guys to get into the program. After what? After the destruction of the first temple. By whom? The Assyrians. When? About 605 to 585 BC. So the first temple lasted from when to when? That's what we were talking about the other day. Who started building the first temple?
Solomon.
David started and Solomon finished it. When was that? Around 1020 or 1010 or something like that BC. So it went on for about, I guess you'd say, 400 years or so. And then it was destroyed by the Babylonians in this conquest. And then a certain number of the people, the Israelites, didn't exist anymore. You have gradually diminishing pools of genealogical groupings descending from a certain heritage. First you have Abraham, as we said, and then that splits off into several surrounding countries. For instance, Jordan today. What's the capital of Jordan today? Amman. What biblical group does that allude to? The Ammonites. Who are the Ammonites? They're descendants of Jacob, in that they are Esau's people. They descend from Esau. The Moabites and the Ammonites are descendants of Esau. So the Bible is interested in giving you the genealogies of the neighboring peoples who are related to the Jews. Like the Arabs say, well, as we said last time, we're from Ishmael. Well, I doubt if all the Egyptians are from Ishmael. For sure they're not. I'm sure the Iraqis aren't from Ishmael. I'm sure the Syrians aren't from Ishmael. The Hebrews meant from Ishmael. The Midian was one, and that certainly is Sinai. The Arab tribes in Sinai, the close Arab tribes in areas surrounding Israel proper as we now know it, not the far Arab tribes. For instance, Saudi today, I'm sure have nothing to do with Ishmael, but all of them, the myth takes over the history. When it's all in the cloudy past, as we said the other day, then the poetry becomes the history, and the history retreats because, well, we're all sons of Ishmael, but they got that from the Bible. But they don't admit that it came from the Bible. They think it came from Muhammad. But Muhammad was told and was reading the Bible. That's why it isn't from an angel. It's from the Bible. And he knows these are the Hebrew genealogies, so he just widens them to all Arabs. So Abraham becomes the father of all Arabs, so we're descendants of Abraham too, according to him. But again, if you did DNA, I'm sure you'd find that wasn't true. Maybe 10% of Arabs would be descendants of this Abraham, if that many. And a lot of them would be Greeks, Canaanites, and other peoples who were conquered by Arabs. Probably the majority would be conquered peoples. But as your parents are killed and you're taken over by another group and you're assimilated and made part of that group, you forget your parents and your ancestors and you accept the mythology of the conqueror. And so after 4 or 5 generations, like you guys, how many remember your great-grandfather? How many know their great-grandfather? Probably almost no one in this room. You've heard of him, maybe. I don't even know. I mean, I've heard of my great-grandfather, but I don't even know my great-grandmother. I don't know her brothers and sisters. I don't know anything, and I'm living in a literate age. I think the most I can get back to is my mother and some of her cousins and aunts and uncles, and that's about it. That's where it dies. And all those people, it disappear into oblivion. They all evaporate, as we will do, in people's memory. So your memory is actually a very short thing. That's where the genealogists give these stories to try to keep the memory alive. And in the Hebrew genealogists, they're focusing on the group that came down to us, the one that us, meaning the people living now in the land of Israel. And they're not so interested in the surrounding people, so they say, oh, some of these are our cousins. And they give their genealogies too, and by Ishmael they meant Sinai and Midian and the tribes there. In any event, in Isaiah, we have a picture of the Jews. These gradually descending tribal groups that I was trying to explain in these genealogies. First you have Hebrews, who are the Abraham people. Then you have his sons and grandson, Jacob. And Jacob gets a name change to Israel, and he has 12 sons. These are the storytellers' view of this. Whether this is true or not, I wouldn't want to bet my life on it. The storytellers told stories to the generations later to flatter them, the way Homer told stories to the descendants of the Greek heroes that he has in his poetic works. Whether they did all these things, whether Odysseus made all those adventures, whether, all the things that happened in the Trojan War are true, or just trying to flatter others, is open to question. So these are the stories, and I said in all my classes, poetry is truer than history. For this period, the storyteller, the poet, takes the place of the historian. You only get real history as you get down into the Greek period, Josephus, and more in our time when we have actual records that we put on computer sheets, films, tape recordings. That's when real history really takes hold. You get a good historian here, a good historian there. As I told you, in place of Josephus, what do you have in Mongolia in 850? What? Well, people lived there. They were surviving. But there's no Josephus to illuminate it. And only certain periods in history are illuminated. And that's why the New Testament is so interesting, because it's already in a very illuminated period. Roman writers are writing about it, Josephus was writing about it, and so on. So without the illumination, we know very, very little. In any case, after Hebrews, then you get down to Israel, who becomes Jacob, according to the storyteller. I'm not sure if you will want to rely on that. Jacob becomes Israel, rather. And he gets a new name. And then his sons are the sons of Israel, the Israelites, or the Israelite tribes. And those are the 12 tribes. As we move down, when the Assyrians take over the north, the 10 lost tribes of Israel come into play. That's when the 10 of the tribes evaporate and nobody can follow where they went. Are they still there? Are they the Samaritans who descend from that area? Are they in Afghanistan today? Are they the American Indians? Are they the British Israelites? Who knows? The legend of the 10 lost tribes has gripped people's imagination for centuries. Yeah?
So which are the two that remain?
That's a good question, because there may be 3 that remain. The problem is the number of tribes, if you read your Bible, shifts a lot, because Joseph gets a double portion. If you know your Bible, he's so important, Joseph, as the patronymic person of the north, Israel's favorite son, that 2 of his children get land, and they take the place of whom? Levi. That is his bequest of land is withdrawn in favor of his priesthood. So he becomes the priestly tribe, not a land grant tribe, as it were. So when you ask which remained, well, Levi always remained down to the present day. I was laughing with my wife the other day because I went on Google. I was Googling someone to find an agency. Her name of this agency was Barbara Levy. I wanted to find her address. It was in England. I was trying to get an address from her. And up popped our senator from California, Barbara Boxer. And Google said, born Barbara Levy in Brooklyn. So we have a Levite senator here. So, anybody with a name even remotely resembling Levi is claiming descent from the tribe of Levi, the priestly tribe of the Bible. And inner group of the Levites are who? The descendants of Aaron, supposedly, as the Bible presents it, and they're called Cohens. So there's all kinds of people today who claim to be Cohens. Everyone wants to be a Levite or a Cohen. And that's just like, it's no good to be from Issachar or from the tribe of Asher. Who cares about them? They don't have any pizzazz. They don't go anywhere. Everyone wants to be a Cohen. So you have so many Cohens. You have Caan, James Caan, the actor, Kahana, anything to do with something or other will be Cohen of some kind. I think even this guy Carey, he's a Cohen. That's right. He was originally Cohen. And when he left Czechoslovakia, his granddad looked at the map and said, what would go? Let's just take, there's County Kerry in Ireland. We'll call ourselves Kerry. So, in fact, when he got to Massachusetts, which was full of Irish people, they all thought he was from County Kerry in Ireland, when in fact his dad is a Cohen. And that's the way, you didn't know that? Of course they don't know it. He doesn't advertise that. He claims he didn't know it himself. I don't believe him. I think he's a bloody liar. I'm sure he's a liar. I mean, Bush is a liar, we know, but see, he never gets tagged as a liar. Kerry doesn't. He's Mr. Saint. But he's as bad as Bush, let me tell you, in terms of lying. Maybe worse because Bush is dumb and he isn't. So I think the people who have some brain are actually more blamable than people who are just stupid. I think many of Bush's lies are like sort of bumble lies, like he stumbles into it. That doesn't mean he's a saint, I would agree. But I'm more frightened of people who have a brain and lie than I am of people who are stupid. So anyway, it's kind of frightening. I would cut the cake. We don't have any Abraham Lincolns walking around, I'll tell you that. And Mr. Wilkes Booth really did us a disservice when he removed that. The last best great president that we had, and we've been stumbling along pretty much blind man's bluff ever since. But we certainly don't have any saints running around in these days. Clinton we all thought was a saint, but then it turned out he was a sinner. So anyway, to get back to Cohens, I didn't mean to out Kerry out of the closet for you. I don't mean to upset anybody here, but. He's a Catholic, did you know, Karen? He goes to church and everything like that, takes Mass and all these things. Yeah. So is Madeline Albright, she is too. We dig into her background, she's also Jewish. And there's a lot of those folks walking around. Some admit...
Zionist plot.
Huh?
It's a Zionist plot.
Oh yeah, well I wouldn't say that. These are unconscious Zionists if it's a plot. The protocols of the elders of Zion, genealogically speaking. No, these are the backsliders. These are the ones I would more trust them if they would come out and admit who and what they are, rather than hide it even from themselves. And we have a lot of. There's another one. There's a third one, all from that area. How many saw that movie Sunshine? That's a great movie, and it's about Czechoslovakia in the time of the beginning of the First World War and through the coming of the communists, and how people hid their identity there and converted in order to get ahead in the society because they had to in order to get a job. All these people like Carey, Madeline Albright, they all come from there. All their families come from there, and that's what they were doing.
Didn't you tell some people that don't know Washington Post the same thing?
I didn't tell you anything about that. I don't know them, but I can't say. The New York Times or that, but I don't know about the Washington Post. In any case, the New York Times don't hide. But off the subject though, that movie is really great. If you have a chance to rent it, it's a beautiful, beautiful movie about that whole thing. And it ends with the person taking their name back after the Holocaust, after the Germans, after the communists, and going into the registration bureau and saying, I want to be called Sonnenschein again, which was sunshine in English. And I want and the person, why do you want that back? Why do you want your family name back? I want my family name back. And to honor my ancestors, as it were. But it's really it's really great. One of the best movies I've ever seen, actually, in terms of history and illuminating a certain period. So when you see that, you'll know something about these people. There is a third one. That guy, Cohn, who was the senator from Maine, who became the defense minister, he also was a Catholic. He's a Catholic. So all these are Cohens who have backslid in some way and become something else. And there's a lot of other ones out there running around. And of course, your Levi trousers and all the other things. So that's one tribe. You got me off the subject. So that's one tribe that doesn't seem to be apportioned. So it depends how many tribes were left. The south was considered to be composed of Judah and Simeon. But we never hear about Simeon at all. So, I mean, it's basically two tribes left, Judah and Levites. Cohens being Levites. That's my basic explanation. And, you know, as the northern tribes were carried away, then we get into only the Judeans, or Judea. So when Jesus comes, he's a king of Judea. These are Judeans, from the word Judah, Yehuda, Yehud, Jew, in English Jew. So that is the last group, and that's after the Babylonian captivity. So after the Babylonian captivity, then, after they cart away these people after the fall of the temple in 600 or so, they function there till about 540, when Isaiah, the second part, is writing, and he greets the new Messiah. Who is the new Messiah? Cyrus, and he calls him. Cyrus says, apparently the Jews are coming to him with a book like Isaiah and saying to Cyrus, look, we predicted your coming, our God leveled the way for you. It was our God who gave you the strength to destroy the Babylonians. It was our God who made your coming. The same as Josephus does to Vespasian. This is always the thing to do to credulous people, though I think Cyrus is smarter than Vespasian. In any case, Cyrus is called, in Hebrew, what? Koresh. And I said in my other class, you've heard of David Koresh? He read his Bible, and the reason he took the name Koresh is he knew that Cyrus was the Messiah of the Old Testament. And he knew that Isaiah had said, Cyrus, my Messiah, you shall accomplish my whole purpose. Cyrus, my anointed one, you shall accomplish my whole purpose. In Hebrew, Koresh, my Mashiach, you will accomplish my whole purpose. So David Koresh, being a smart guy, a pretty cool guy, and knowing, you know, what these things implied, adopted the name. I don't know if his name was even David, I think it was, but it may not have even been David, but took the last name of Koresh, implying that he was the Messiah from Isaiah. And it doesn't tell you a lot, but it tells you how these things function. In any case, that is an actual historical picture of the Jews returning. Because what Cyrus says, and I say of the towns of Judah, let them be inhabited. And I say of the temple, let it be rebuilt. And he's quoted as saying that at that moment. And I think that is written by eyewitness people. Actually heard him say that. Like he would go before the great king, give him a petition, and then he would give his pronouncement. And his pronouncement was, and I say of the towns of Judah, let them be inhabited. And I say of the temple, you people say, as predicted me, let it be rebuilt. And that's it. That's the return. That's what Isaiah is celebrating. I know that turns into the Hallelujah chorus and the celebration of Jesus Christ, but if you read Isaiah carefully, I did it in my last class and I want to board this class too, you'll find Isaiah is celebrating the return of the Jewish people from captivity after Cyrus's warrant to return. Comfort ye my people. I know that that's reinterpreted 500-600 years later and ever after as meaning the birth of the Messiah. But that's not what Isaiah is talking about. He's talking about the return of the Jewish people from captivity and being comforted. And it's all through there. You just read it carefully and without your preconception. Just read what Isaiah is saying and you'll say that someone has taken this all out of context and applied it to a total other event. Which is fair enough. That's what people did with biblical exegesis. But that's what I mean about taking things out of context. Look at the context and you will know that the big event, why the messengers are on the high mountains, are fleet of foot, why highways are being drawn up in the desert, why water is being put in the desert and so on, which is reinterpreted in esoteric, allegorical way later on in terms of baptism and so on. But in Isaiah, it's so that the people can return across the desert from Iraq to Palestine in the wake of this rescript of Cyrus. And I know it's boring and it's not as exciting as to have someone born in a manger and have Handel putting all this to music. But in fact, that's the humdrum thing that Isaiah is about. So it doesn't have the secondary meaning about that. Nowhere in the whole of Isaiah will you see a secondary meaning about the meaning that's given. What about the suffering servant? Suffering servant, if you read it carefully, is the whole people of Israel. I mean, who have suffered all these trials after they, I know it's not going to do a world religion, so don't worry, it's no threat. But it's not going to, go anywhere. But the point of it is, you read it, you'll see it. Well, didn't it have a secondary meaning? Well, you can put a secondary meaning to anything, even to what I'm saying. But did the prophet Isaiah mean a secondary meaning? No, I don't think so. And it even looks like that the ruler who came back in the first captivity, Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel sounds like a weird name. It really means shoot out of David, born in Babylon. But to us it's Zerubbabel or something like that. Babel is Babylon, and Zeru means shoot. It's a Davidic family member who, a descendant who led the return under Cyrus and came to a bad end because history doesn't know where he is. Drops out. Probably he was executed. Maybe he's the suffering servant in Isaiah. Because the point is that something bad happens to him. Because he drops out, and by the time we come back into the picture, we don't have any Davidic leaders at all. A century later, we're in the period of Ezra and Nehemiah, and now we've only got priests. Both Ezra and Nehemiah, particularly Ezra, are priests. Nehemiah is a eunuch, so it's not clear. I don't know, it should be this way, I guess. Nehemiah. But these were in the mid-400s. And it turns out that the returnees in the 500s hadn't done much. Hadn't built the walls, hadn't really gotten far with the temple, were the prey to all kinds of foreign tribes that were, raiding them. And then Ezra sends back, or Nehemiah sends back Ezra. It's not clear what the relationship of the two, even if Ezra is really historical. But Nehemiah has influence at the court, and he's a cupbearer, meaning anyone at the Persian court would be a eunuch. So he would certainly be someone who could not be a priest or something. So he would need a representative, because you couldn't have a physical blemish if you were a priest. Anyway, at that point, they start to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and the temple, and that's the Second Temple period. Then we go to a dark hole, as I told you. Next thing we end up with, Alexander the Great, 333, as I told you. Then down into the war against Hellenistic control, particularly the Seleucids, who are in neighboring Syria. I told you that Alexander's empire was divided up into 4 parts. The general Seleucus and his descendants got the area around Syria. The general Ptolemy, the last descendant of whom was Cleopatra, got the area around Egypt. And they were called the Ptolemies. And there were 2 other generals who got Asia Minor and mainland Greece. That's the 4 winds of Daniel, of the 4 parts of the descendants of the great hairy he-goat that comes out of the west and conquers the world, if you've read the book of Daniel. Anyway, down in the Maccabean period, you have this uprising. So for a time, you have Jewish independence. 175 BC. Hanukkah, as we said, celebrates that. And then the Romans come. So the Romans come under Caesar's colleague, Pompey. He's the conqueror in the east. Caesar's the conqueror in the west. They have what's called a triumvirate. There's a third guy who's in the middle who they finally fall out with. And then they fall out with each other. But these dates are pretty clear. Pompey, it's in Josephus now, very clearly, and you can read Josephus, takes Jerusalem in 63 BC. He assaults Jerusalem and takes it. And by that time, the Jewish polity is split. There are 2 groups competing with control. So the Jews only have real independence for how long? 100 years. 100 years. And then they're back under Roman control. And part of the split is in the Maccabean family itself. You can find all this in Josephus, but I'll summarize it for you. 2 brothers fall out with each other. One is called Aristobulus. They've taken Greek names by this time. Actually, his Hebrew name is Judah, or Judas. And the other, Hyrcanus. I forget what his name is. I think it's John. That's why you get all these names in the New Testament, like John, Judas, Simon. These are all Maccabean names. The Maccabean names of Maccabean leaders, rulers, kings. Mary, the last Maccabean princess, was named what? Miriam, Herod's wife. That's why you get all the Marys in the New Testament. Just like people today name themselves after famous figures, people then did too. So, by that time, Miriam, and shows you their affections. If you don't name someone after someone if you don't like that person. So since all the Christian characters are Maccabean names, including Lazarus, which is Eliezer, which is one of the names of one of the Maccabean brothers and so on, you don't name after people if you don't have affection for them. So the Christian characters are all in the tradition of Jewish revolutionary nationalism. And that's something that is just not understood by people who don't do the history. So right away the history helps you. Okay, so Mary is just a shorting of Mariam, Miriam. In Arabic it's Maryam, and so on and so forth. So that's pretty straightforward. So Pompey, there's a split here among these two brothers. He's the older brother, so he's the high priest. They were priest kings by this time. They'd taken both priesthood because they were priestly family and kingship. And they argue and fight with each other, and Aristobulus defeated him. And he's supported by the Pharisees, who have actually come into existence at that time. And he's supported by nationalist zealots, whom we don't know what they're called. Zealots, if you like. They haven't been called zealots yet. Sadducees, perhaps, but not Sadducees of the New Testament variety. That's the key. Sadducees of a more nationalist stripe. Because Josephus tells us that under Herod, the Sadducees were dominated by the Pharisees and all that. And that's, Herod killed all the previous establishment when he took over. You say, well, who is this Herod? I'm going to tell you in a minute. What?
I didn't get who won with the battle with the
Aristobulus won, but I'm going to go back to that. So for a time he's in control, but his brother is upset by this and goes to Herod's father, who is a kind of intermediary from across Jordan in Petra, what we now call Arabian Petra. So Herod is of an Edomite, Josephus calls him Idumean, and they say his father was also a priest a Greek priest in Ashkelon or Gaza, down near the Gaza Strip now, but then went over to Transjordan area of Petra. So the genealogical records of Herod's family are pretty straightforward. He's a Greco-Arab. He is not Jewish, and that is the whole problem of this period that nobody knows about. Because everyone assumes that Herod is the Jewish king. That's a problem in adjectives. To be king of the Jews didn't mean you were Jewish. King of the Jews is a title in Roman bureaucratic operational activity. It was something that was given out to various people if they could do a good job, get the taxes, and control the area. So you didn't have to be Jewish to eat Jewish Levi's rye bread or something. Now they made believe they were Jewish to a certain extent in order to ingratiate themselves with the people. But in fact, Herod is famous for being all things to all people. When he's in Jerusalem, he's a Jew. When he's in Samaria, he's a Samaritan. He decorates Greek temples. He gives he wants to ingratiate himself to everyone. He gives lavish gifts because he knows people's weaknesses. He builds pagan temples in Samaria. He builds Greek shrines in mainland Greece and so on. He builds forts in honor of Antonia, Mark Antony, who he's always sucking up to. He builds cities like Caesarea in honor of Caesar, or his descendants build Tiberias in honor of Caesar's descendant Tiberius. So these are people who are sucking up to whoever they can suck up to in order to keep power.
but they are not Jewish. And that is one of the rubbish. So what's that got to do with it? Well, Paul comes along, and that's his philosophy too. If you read Corinthians very carefully, particularly Corinthians, I think, is 8 or 9, 1 Corinthians, he says, I am a Greek to the Greek, a Jew to the Jew, a lawkeeper to the lawkeeper, a lawbreaker to the lawbreaker. That's Herod completely. I will do whatever I have to do to win. That's Herod and Saddam Hussein. Now, we don't judge Paul because we love him. He's a saint. Well, you may love him, but I don't. And I'll just be upfront at that. I think he's a horrendous person. And he reveals himself as a horrendous, totally unprincipled individual from the very first line he writes to the last. But he's not aware of it. He thinks he's wonderful. And yet sometimes your jaw drops open, you're aghast at some of the things he's willing to say. And what an horrendous person he actually is. He's not full of love, by the way. There's no Christian charity in his person. He hates his enemies, and he hates them with a passion. And he doesn't show any charity whatsoever. But because he's a saint and people are taught to love him, and he's very clever, and some of the formulations he makes are very mystifying and captivating. He's a very good polemicist, extremely good dialectician. He's the first person that applied logic to the area of theology. So we're kind of come under his thrall. We're enchanted by him. Now, I know people get angry at me, and I shouldn't say these things, and I'm filming myself. I certainly shouldn't say that I'm filming. But I hate to tell you, I know it's horrible to say, don't hate me for saying it. But the person, when I read Paul, who I hear in my mind when I read him, is Joseph Goebbels, a master of propaganda. And I hear it, and the voices are the same. And I kind of it frightens me to death that one is abominated and the other is so adored. Because the voice, if you hear it, is so similar in the way it twists what it's working with and weaves spells by it. So it's kind of it's really frightening. I know anyone who believes in these things is going to dislike me for saying that, but maybe the world should hear a bit of that, and then we'd have fewer Joseph Goebbels. Because if you are tuned in to having someone said something negative, just the way someone said something negative about Kerry or Bush, and then you start to think, well, is that true? That helps, because it makes you more objective. You may not agree with what was said, but it makes you think about it. So maybe we should say a few more negative things about these people, and then people wouldn't be carried away with all this fanaticism and intoxication, and we might get a more gentle, really gentle and reasonable world. So I don't think it hurts to say some negative things. I may be off base. I'm just telling you where I come from. I do not like Paul as a human being. I'm impressed by his ability. I grant you his cleverness, his dexterity, his mental agility, all these things are there. His creativity, his quick mastery of rhetoric and repartee, and he made mincemeat out of his opponent. But that doesn't mean that winning is everything. Anyway, as he said, I believe in winning. That's what all the athletes at the stadium are running for, a prize. But I am running for a prize that will never wither, never die. That's how I fight. Using the language of stadium athletics that he is calculated to infuriate Jews, because they fought the whole Maccabean uprising against stadium athletics and going around naked and being involved in this sort of gymnasium activity that we do like today. But I'm going to go around naked, oiling the bodies, letting your sexual parts be displayed openly and so on. The Jews were horrified by that. Maybe they shouldn't have been, but that was part of the Maccabean uprising and the Hellenistic things that they were fighting against. Here comes Paul using the symbolism of this and saying, that's how I fight, not beating the air. And that is true. Paul fought to win. Let me finish. He's the first modern man. He believes in the ethic of win, just win, baby, win, as the coach of the owner of the Raiders said, or Vince Lombardi. How did it go? Winning isn't, what was it?
It's the only thing.
Winning isn't the only thing, it's everything, or vice versa. What was your question?
What do you really mean by beating the air?
Oh, he's boxing. He wants to get the knockout punch in. That's not how he fights, to win. He's not fighting like, you know, he's using the imagery of stadium athletics and boxing. That the Jews would have been horrified by. That's what he does. Anyway, you have to take my word for it. If you don't believe me, go read it yourself and you draw your conclusions. But see, this is not things that are read in churches. We want to read the beautiful stuff in the churches. We forget the negative stuff, like Thessalonians 2:15. The Jews are the enemies of the whole human race. You want to claim where the Holocaust comes from? Right there. Right there. And as long as that stays there, there will be Holocaust till the end of time. You know, as long as you demonize a group of people, and the Jews were not the enemies of the whole human race. They were contributing huge amounts of good things to the human race. They are the enemies to Paul because they were opposing him. And in the eyes of someone who is being opposed by someone, they are demons. And they are to be demonized because he is being opposed by them. And he hates them. He hates them because they don't agree with his agenda or the approach that he's laying out. Well, the approach is that the law is a curse. Well, look, you're not going to get any Jew to be very happy about that one. The law is not a curse as far as most Jews are concerned. And Moses, he says in Galatians, I'm getting ahead of myself, but Moses, he says in Corinthians, he shows Moses as a charlatan. He can say anything he wants like Goebbels because he knows his people are so ignorant who are reading him and have no idea, they never go to the sources themselves, they have no idea what he's talking about, that they'll believe what he's saying rather than go check it out. You know what he says about Moses in that same letter to Corinthians? He says, Moses put a bag or a veil over his head in order that the people should not know that the light of the law had gone out. You know, the Jews or the scripture portrays Moses as being irradiated for having gone up on Mount Sinai and going into the tent of meeting. Whenever he came into the divine presence, he was so irradiated that he had to put a veil over his head so the people wouldn't be burned. Paul says, oh no, he put a veil over his head so that they should know there was nothing there. In other words, Moses was a cheat and a scab and a scoundrel, that he was lying to the people. This is preposterous. But he can get away with that to the end of time. Why? That's what I mean about the Goebbels stuff. Why can he get away with that? Because people don't understand what he's saying particularly, and like the final thrust of it, you know, the great glory of the German people, or in his case, the triumph of Pauline Christianity, that the law is not necessary. So that's what he's trying to show. So Moses is a charlatan who tricked the people and put a veil over his head. Maybe there was no veil. Maybe Moses' face wasn't irradiated. I don't defend the historicity of that episode. But I certainly attack someone who is going to use the Bible, pick and choose, use it where it suits him, and then laugh at it where it doesn't. To my mind, that is the behavior of a someone, what's the word? Not a Johnny-come-lately, but someone who is exploiting things, who is insincere and just using it in order to promote his own interests. I don't know the right word. An opportunist. That's really good. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. An opportunist. And then elsewhere, on the wake of that, he says in Galatians, as I told you, that when he loves these tricks that he plays with language, and he thinks he can get away with anything. He says, for instance, because look, the main problem for Paul is the Jews. That's what you say, well, why is it always these things you're picking up? Because that's all Paul's talking about. His whole thing is circumcision, the law, everything. This is the dietary regulations. This is what he's arguing about. This is what he's heaping abuse on. Maybe it should be heaped abuse on, but not in the manner of the way Paul does it. He does it in an unscrupulous, very antagonistic, extremely nasty, I guess is the right word, that it's no wonder people who read Paul have been anti-Semitic ever after. You would be too if you read that. That's what I mean. Paul, to my mind, is the Holocaust. And until you can appreciate that, you cannot get out from under the guilt of the Holocaust. Now, none of us want the guilt of 1 million children in our hands. So studying James is the way out of this. Doing classes like this actually is the way out of this. Getting rid of the wolf in sheep's clothing is the way out, actually. And a lot of people think, oh, what are you studying that for? That's right. No, that's the only way out of it. It's not the thing to be feared. It's the way to get out from under these horrendous things that have been done and said in the name of Christianity when they were never Christian to begin with these things. And that's why to study these things is really important. If you're a Christian particularly, you don't want to be responsible for the destruction of uncountable millions of South Americans, Native American peoples. You don't want to be responsible for crucifixions. I mean, for burning at the stake, for inquisitions. You don't want to be responsible for, forget 5 million adults, 1 million children being burned. We're not talking about one little thing in Chechnya, which is horrible as it is. We're talking about multiplying 300 children there, what? By 30,000 or something? I mean, we're talking about something that's so incalculable it can't even be imagined. And it just happened 50 years ago because of modern methods. So that's why I think it's important. Yes, Paul says in Galatians, whipping up this hatred, you know, we're the children of the promise, we Christians. We're the real children of Sarah. And he means allegorically, you see, because he loves allegory. You know, and the Jews, they're slaves. They're slaves. So they're the descendants of Hagar. We Christians are the descendants of Sarah. The Jews are the descendants of Hagar. Well, we know the biblical genealogies are just the opposite, don't we? The Jews are not the descendants of Hagar. The Jews are the descendants of Sarah. That's just turning it all upside down. But he thinks he can say anything he wants. One, because the people he's talking to don't know anything and are not going to read it. He's talking to someone out in Lithuania or something, or some other person in Paraguay. What do they know? What are they going to know? Just what Paul tells them, or what the priests make them learn from what Paul tells them. So then he says, why? The reason the Jews are the children of the slave woman, who is Agar, who is Mount Sinai. So he's saying that Agar is from Midian, and that's where Mount Sinai is. Therefore, the Jews follow the law of Moses that was delivered in Mount Sinai. Therefore, they are it's very clever verbal gymnastics. You see how quick he is? That's how fast he is. But see, that's why I compare him to Goebbels, because that's the kind of thing Goebbels did. He would whip up anything like that in the interest of the thing he was trying to achieve, making the people hate or go away from something. So yeah, you see, Agar is Mount Sinai, because he knows that Moses met her in Midian, and she was the daughter of the priest of Midian, which is in Sinai. That's Mount Sinai, and therefore you see it's the law of Moses. So what are they slaves to? They're slaves to the law of Moses. We New Pauline people, we're free of the law of Moses. We're free of the law. We are free, and therefore we're children of the free wife, Sarah. Therefore, we're the descendants of Sarah, and they're descendants of the slave woman. He ends up with a quote from the Bible. Therefore, cast out the slave woman. Therefore, cast out the slave woman. This is his dialectic. This is his polemic. So when I tell you I have a problem with that, I mean, you can perhaps understand why. Let me just keep you. I want to finish up because time is wasting. I just want to finish this because we have to go. But going back to where we were, I don't know how we got off on that subject, but getting back to where we were, we get down these two brothers arguing. And then the one brother, I know how we got it. Because Herod's policy was to be all things to all people. So was Paul's policy. And then you look surprised, so I tried to illustrate it with these examples. I think Paul is a descendant of the Herodian family. I argue that in my books. Michael Page and the Statue School Reception has picked that up from me. And one of the students in one of these classes pointed that out to me. In Romans, As I think I told you last time, Paul sends greetings to his kinsman Herod, the littlest Herod, Herodian. It's in Romans 16, you'll see it. Send my greetings to my kinsman, the littlest Herod. I always thought Paul was from the Herodian family. And now from that moment on, I was convinced of it. And I do feel that what he shows is the Herodian ethos in his mind. He thinks he's Jewish. Just like the Herodians thought that they had become Jewish, but they were Jewish. Not that being Jewish is great. Most people think it's a thing to suffer from. But he isn't Jewish as a native-born Jew. So he's got all these complexes in relation to this that will come out. Let's finish this up. These two brothers fight. The defeated brother brings in, through Herod's family, the Romans. Pompey then comes and storms Aristobulus' partisans who are in the temple. The year is 63 BC. Aristobulus is sent in chains to Rome, where he stays under Roman control for another 15 years or so. When Julius Caesar fights the war with Pompey, he frees Aristobulus and sends him back. But the supporters of Pompey, the people who later assassinate Julius Caesar, killed Aristobulus on his way back. And later on, it's so beautiful passage in Josephus, the Romans sent Aristobulus back to Palestine in honey. That is to preserve his body. They have it in a thing of honey that they sent it back for burial. But he was a prisoner in Rome, killed by the other party in support of the Pompey party, the people who fought Julius Caesar. In the meantime, the Romans, 63, take control, and their first governor is Herod's father. And because of his services to Rome, Herod's father becomes a Roman citizen and his family in perpetuity. It's all in Josephus. So that's really very interesting because Paul says he's a Roman citizen. That was not something that's given out by accident. That's another factor that makes me suspect that he may be an Herodian, because all of them would have had Roman citizenship. So he's the first Roman governor. Then we get a couple of years there where Herod is fighting with the various Jewish groups and so on. He's governor of Galilee for a while. The Jews want him tried before the Sanhedrin for killing revolutionary leaders. Finally, when the civil war breaks out between Octavian and Antony, Herod jumps to Octavian's side. Octavian sends him back to Palestine with an army of Roman troops in 37 BC. And with an army of Roman troops, he storms Jerusalem a second time and puts himself in power as king. Roman appointed king of Palestine. So that's right where we start. Herod is not a Jewish king, first of all, and second of all, he's not a popular Jewish king. He's imposed on the Jews from outside, and that is the background of the story of the birth of Jesus, where Herod is trying to kill him, according to the gospel. Sorry to take us so long, you guys. I will not get off the subject again. We're going to move on now. Much more. Stick to our thing. I apologize. Put these things on. I got to